Introducing the BMW 3 Series. I know you've probably already heard of the 3 Series, but what I actually mean is that this model is from the very first generation of the 3 Series, known internally as the E21. If you're new here, I'm Shervin Nakhjavani. Welcome to the Peterson Automotive Museum. Today we're taking an up-close look at one of the cars that is featured in our exhibit, the Ultimate Racing Machine, 50 years of the BMW 3 Series in motorsports. We'll talk about its history, its unique design elements, and why it's important in the 3 Series story. When the 3 Series debuted in 1975, it replaced the outgoing 02 series, better known by its most famous model, the 2002. Now, if you're not familiar with how BMW model names or numbers work, let me give you a quick crash course. BMW used to name their models with the engine displacement at the beginning of the model name rather than at the end. So on the 02 series, where most of the model names ended in 02, 2002 meant you had a 2-liter engine in an 02 body, 2002. The 2 at the end meant it had 2 doors. 1802 meant you had a 1.8-liter engine in a 2-door, and 1602 meant, you guessed it, a 1.6-liter in a 2-door. More or less. If you really measure these engines by the cc's, it wouldn't exactly come out to 1600, 1800, or 2000. The numbers were either rounded up or down. And that's pretty much the way BMW named their cars back then. Got it? Well, Bob Lutz didn't. In 1972, he joined BMW as the board member for sales and marketing, and he found the naming conventions a bit confusing. So he tasked his team to come up with a better system. So when the 3 Series was introduced in 1975, everything I just mentioned changed. Now, instead of the engine displacement being at the beginning of the model name, it was at the end. 316, 318, 320, and so on. So this is a 320i, and the I means the motor is fuel injected instead of carbureted. Now, this car is a 1983 model, which was the final year for the E21 generation. But there are still a lot of overall design elements that stayed the same from the beginning. Speaking of design, let's talk a little bit about the designer, Paul Brock. If you're a fan of German cars from the 60s, you may already be familiar with Brock's work. Cars like the Mercedes-Benz W108 and W109, the W111 Coupe and Cabriolet, the W112 Fintail sedan, the W114 and 115, and perhaps his most famous designs at Mercedes-Benz, the 600 and the Pagoda SL Roadster. All of these cars had Brock's influence in one way or another. When he went to BMW, Brock designed the first generations for some of the marque's most famous model lines, the 3 Series, the 5 Series, and the 6 Series, or the E21, E12, and E24 if we're being technical. Now that's not something to skim past because it's actually quite rare to see one car designer basically start the design language for 3 very famous and successful model lines. Mr. Brock didn't invent BMW's design language. The famous kidney grille was already in place, as well as the Hoffmeister kink, which we'll get to. But much of how BMWs have looked in the past 50 years can be attributed to him. Even if you look at the second generation of the 3 and the 5 Series, which Brock did not design, you can still see similarities that were carried over, including the taillight pattern on the E30, for example, which was amber on the outside, red in the center, and clear on the inside. Now, if you compare those taillights side by side with these, the taillights of the pre-facelift E30 actually almost looks like 2 sets of E21 taillights stacked on top of each other. You can also see the same similarities on the E23 7 Series taillights, as well as the post-facelift E12 5 Series. Both had the exact same taillight pattern. But the similarities didn't end there. Brock's E12 5 Series and its successor, designed by Klaus Luth, the E28 5 Series, look even more similar. Both have the same overall shape, and you would be forgiven if you mistook one for the other from the front 3/4 view. What can I say? It was a memorable design from a memorable designer. But there is one more design feature that I haven't talked about yet, and that is the famous Hoffmeister kink. What is it? Well, take a look at this line here on the C-pillar. On most cars, it would go all the way down to the corner, but on BMWs, that wasn't the case. Now, it wasn't Wilhelm Hoffmeister who invented this, but it is commonly attributed to him. Now, eliminating the corner there on the C-pillar with the Hoffmeister kink dramatically reduces the stress on the body, thereby eliminating the chances of a crack developing because of flex. Now here's a fun fact for you. The E21 was the first and last 3 Series to only be available with 2 doors. 4-door sedans came later with the E30 3 Series. Another interesting feature unique to the E21 are the headlights. Now, if you grew up in the US like me and you don't know a whole lot about the E21, you might not know what I mean. That's because in the US, the E21 was only available with quad headlights. Low beams on the outside and high beams on the inside, like a lot of American cars at the time. But elsewhere in the world, the car came with either quad headlights or dual headlights. That means just 2 headlights. The quads were reserved for higher-end models, typically those with 6-cylinder engines, at least in the rest of the world. There were other changes that American versions had, pretty big changes. Because of safety regulations at the time, all cars sold in the US had to have bumpers that could withstand a 5-mile-per-hour impact. Of course, many European cars weren't designed with that requirement in mind, so the American bumpers were a design afterthought and stood out in comparison with the rest of the car. When this requirement was first implemented, none of the European imports from any manufacturer looked particularly graceful, but this improved over time. BMW enthusiasts today lovingly refer to these as diving boards, and when combined with the larger turn signals, the mandatory side markers, and the sealed beam headlights, they're a reminder of how BMWs in the US looked like during that period of time. There were emissions requirements too, which led to the E21 being sold here only as the 320i and the 320is. For context, the rest of the world got the 315, the 316, 318, 318i, 320, 320/6, 320i, and 323. And American requirements made things even more restrictive because initially the American 320i was sold with a detuned 2-liter version of the 4-cylinder M10 engine. But 2 years later, that engine was downsized to a 1.8-liter. This made going from 0 to 60 miles per hour take anywhere between 11 and 14 seconds. The late 70s and early 80s were not exactly the peak for performance for any brand. I just think it's important to highlight 2 things. One, that performance drastically improved over the course of the 3 Series next generations, and 2, that even despite the E21's low by today power ratings, it still managed to deliver a memorable enough driving experience to pave the way for what we know today as the ultimate driving machine. In other words, horsepower ratings didn't matter so much to BMW buyers, it was the overall driving experience that did. Now, part of that is because of BMW's marketing at the time, but a lot of it is just because of the car's design and engineering. The E21 is still revered today as being a pioneer in the world of sports sedans. Now let's take a look at the inside. Now first, I can't go without mentioning this. This car only has 11,000 miles. For a car that was built 43 years ago, that is seriously low. Is it a little bit ironic that the ultimate driving machine hasn't been driven all that much? Maybe. But it's time capsules like these that show us what these cars looked and felt like when they were brand new, and that is invaluable. This car is finished in lapis blue on Pacific blue cloth, and it's immaculate. Take a look at the way the dashboard is angled towards the driver. This actually began with the E21 3 Series and has become a signature BMW trait over time. The original aim was to make things more driver-focused and for BMW to differentiate themselves from competitors like Mercedes-Benz. Now, speaking of driving and performance, it's about time we dive into what this exhibit is really about: racing. We can't do that with this. We'll need an actual race car. Join me next time when we explore the ins and outs of the 1978 BMW 320 Group 5 race car. Until next time, I'm Shervin Nakhjavani at the Peterson. Thanks for watching.